Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is my Forbes colleague, staff writer Zach Everson. Zach, thanks so much for coming back on.
My pleasure, Brittany.
You have even more news about Dominari Holdings and Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump's involvement in the firm. We have a lot to parse through, but first, talk us through what exactly does Dominari Holdings do?
It seems like it'll do anything that'll make it some money. It's a holding company. It has pharmaceutical subsidiary. It works in finance. It's most notable. It was a penny stock. Nobody really paid it much attention. It was most notable that it had a Trump Tower address to it. Other than that, it's not something anybody would have heard about until February 11th, when it announced that Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump had joined its advisory board and also participated in a private placement, bought some shares in the company.
So not only does it have a Trump Tower address, it has two of the Trump sons on board. I want to read one of your headlines from this story. Quote, Trump's sons joined Dominari Holdings advisory board, but there's little public record the board existed beforehand. Can you explain exactly what you mean there?
Yeah, I went ahead and looked for evidence that this advisory board had been an entity prior to the Trumps joining it, and there was very little evidence that it existed out there. Now, it did exist. There are references to it, a few of them, but it did not seem like it had much of an active role in the company. It looked like it was mostly a holdover from when the company was exclusively a pharmaceutical company. It had advisors who were all doctors. Working in the medical field. So there just wasn't much out there. Between June 2021 and February 2025, there were no mentions in SEC filings about an advisory board, except to point out a couple times that one of the officers of the company had been on it for a few months. So that was it. If you look online, there's no reference to it. And also, the company did not even have its advisory board agreement on file with the SEC until February 12th, the day after Don Jr. and Eric were named to it. The only other person we could find who belongs to it is a guy named Ron Lieberman, who is also a board member of the regular board of directors of the company, and also a longtime employee of the Trump Organization.
I'm curious, what exactly do advisory boards do? How big of a role do they play in a company? And specifically, when it comes to Dominari Holdings, what does this advisory board do? What information did you find out about that?
It's pretty vague. They give advice. They're there to review documents if you want them to. It really did not have much specific there. They could vet other members to join the advisory board. It really seems that there's, unlike a board of directors where securities law has specific responsibilities for it, advisory board can largely just pretty much do anything. And that seems to be the way it's the paperwork is set up for Dominari's advisory board to operate.
I've talked to other people about advisory boards. They sound like largely cushy positions. So I am curious, why does this matter? Why does it matter that there was scant evidence that there was an advisory board that existed before the Trumps got on board? What exactly does this indicate to you?
It seems like an easy way to get the Trumps associated with a company and hopefully cause the stock price to jump, which it did. It certainly went up after their involvement was announced. So it's a way to attach the Trumps' names to it, not really require much, if anything, of them, and hopefully see the stock price go up.
So now let's get into the trading here at Dominari Holdings. You're reporting that right before the February announcement that the Trump brothers were becoming involved, that is Don Jr. and Eric Trump, the trading skyrocketed. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we look back over the last 365 days, and it was really interesting how the stock price jumped as we got closer to this announcement. So from February 2024 until December 29th, the stock averaged just 11,500 shares trading a day, which is not all that much. And the price was pretty stable between $1.10 and $3.29. Now, on December 30th, shot up 358,000 shares traded hands that day. And it went on to average $1.2 million of shares trading all the way through February 10th. And the price also fluctuated a lot more as well, hitting a low of 83 cents, but also reaching a high of $6.50 the day before it was announced that the Trumps were on. Now, February 11th, before the market opened, they announced the Trumps were there. They announced the Trump's new role, and the stock price jumped to $11.33, went on to hit $13.58 as a high a couple days later. So you saw this really big jump in volume right before this announcement became public. And I couldn't see anything that seems to have brought that about. I spoke with some experts in securities, talked to some professors, and they looked through the SEC filings and similarly did not see anything that really said, oh, this is why the stock price would have jumped. This is why you would have seen all that trades. We looked through media mentions. Pretty much the only media mentions out there were of the stock price itself, not of the company doing anything in particular that would have, caused it to become more valuable.
The volume in trading significantly increase. Then you see after this announcement, as soon as it was announced that Eric and Don Jr. were involved, you see the stock price increase. Is this normal? Is this just a coincidence? What are experts saying?
The stock price increasing isn't too surprising at all when you've taken this company that really wasn't well known and all of a sudden saying the president's sons are attached to it. Not too surprising it's going to go up there. We've certainly seen Trump-related securities and crypto doing quite well, much better than you would expect based on the valuation of their company. So that wasn't surprising. But one of the experts I spoke to, Alan Pelmiter, a professor at Wake Forest University Law School, described it as super suspicious. He just said it seems that somebody had figured out what was going on well before the press release came out announcing their involvement.
I mean, you hear suspicious. Does this equate to insider trading? What are people saying?
There's no proof of any of that. We don't know who was buying those shares. That is something that regulators could look into. The SEC, FINRA, Nasdaq could all take a look at this. They could try to figure out, who purchased those shares and did any of the people who purchased those shares have connections to insiders in the company. They will not comment publicly if they are investigating anything like that, though. So there's a good chance that we will just never ever know if that was the case and if there were any punishments doled out.
What is the likelihood of regulators looking into this? Slim to none. What have experts told you?
It's something that should have raised red flags, that their computers systems are set up to automatically detect, to go back and look when is a major announcement made and go back and look what the trading volume was leading up to that. The SEC right now falls under the purview of Donald Trump, father of new advisory board members and co-owners and owners in this company, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump. So it does not seem likely that much will, if anything, will come of this.
I want to read one final headline from you regarding this. Insiders loaded up on firm's stock right before Don Jr. and Eric Trump's involvement sent shares soaring. What did experts say to you specifically about that? As suspicious? I mean, what does that look like?
No, it's legal for this to have happened. It's not insider trading. Both parties of the trade, the insiders who were buying it in the company, were most likely well aware of what was going to happen on February 11th when they announced the Trump's involvement. But they were surprised. They say they don't usually see timing like this, where there's a major private placement and bonuses doled out, and then the next day there is big news like this. They just said that is not common. Now, there is a possible legal issue here in that some of the shareholders could sue the board of directors, in which known as a derivative suit, saying like they didn't do their fiduciary duty like they should have. They should not have sold those shares for as cheaply as they did to themselves. They knew that the price was probably going to go up the next day once that news was announced, and they should have got more money out of themselves. So it's possible we could see a lawsuit out of that. Doesn't seem really likely, just because the company's not all that wealthy. A lot of whether or not somebody gets sued depends on how much money they have to pay attorney's fees and court awards. And it does not seem like Dominari is a company that's going to have a lot of money and really catch the eye of any sort of plaintiff's attorney.
This is not the first time you and I have talked about Dominari. You wrote a few stories about them. We're talking about them again. I'm sure you reached out to the company. I'm sure you reached out to the Trumps. Have you received any responses? What are they?
I haven't. I didn't receive any responses at all from the Trumps regarding this. Dominari responded to my first article after it was published, just saying, here's some email addresses. Here's who you should contact should you have questions again. I've reached out to them repeatedly. They did not comment. They did not respond. I reached out to every member of the board of directors who participated in that private placement. Likewise, I did not receive any responses there.
Zach, when you're looking at this whole story, when you're looking at all the reporting surrounding it from really December of 2024 to now in March of 2025, what are your takeaways here?
There's a lot. There's a lot to go on. I think I got 4 or 5 articles here out of some penny stock that nobody really knew about, just over what had transpired over the last couple months. So, it's really interesting continuing to follow this. The stock price has gone back down. Last I checked, it was trading at about $4.80 a share. So less than what it closed on the day before the Trump's involvement was announced. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with, and the extent of the Trump's involvement. If there's any more SEC filings, if that talk about what they're doing, if there are any more private placements, if they sell. We have not seen any evidence that any of these insiders have sold their shares when the price shot up. So, there might be some filings coming out in the future that might give us some more insight on this. Some of the shares may have been tied up. They may not have been able to sell them right away. So hopefully we'll get some insight into what exactly is going on as time progresses.
Well, Zach, I always appreciate your reporting. I always appreciate our conversations. Thanks so much for joining me.
Likewise, Brittany. Thanks for having me.